When I was a kid, the basement was our kingdom. It was unfinished, bare concrete floor, exposed beams in the ceiling, old pipes running along the walls, but to us it was the best place in the house. My parents had let us fill it with toys over the years. We had a massive plastic train set that looped across the floor, bins of action figures and dolls, an old ping-pong table that doubled as a battlefield for board games, and a couch that smelled faintly like dust and dryer sheets. My siblings and I spent most of our weekends down there. We'd build cities out of blocks, stage ridiculous games, and leave the mess exactly where it was so we could continue the next day. The basement had small windows near the ceiling that let in thin lines of daylight, but at night the only light came from a single hanging bulb and an old lamp beside the couch. It should have been creepy. But it wasn't. At least, not at first. Because the strange things started so gradually that we got used to them. Sometimes we'd hear footsteps upstairs when no one was home. Sometimes the pipes would knock in ways that sounded almost like someone tapping on them deliberately, 3 taps, then 2 more. And sometimes we saw things. They were never clear. Just shapes in the darker corners of the basement. Tall silhouettes that leaned against the wall where the light didn't reach. Once I saw something crouched near the furnace, its shape too thin and crooked to be a person. When I blinked, it was gone. My brother claimed he saw a face once between the beams in the ceiling, long and gray, with eyes that looked like empty holes. My sister said she saw something standing behind the couch when we were playing a board game, tall enough that its head should have hit the ceiling. But when she turned around, nothing was there. The weird thing is, none of us were really that scared. Kids accept strange things more easily than adults. We just shrug and say things like, "The basement's being weird." Again. Then we'd go back to playing. But one night changed that. It was a Saturday evening in winter. I remember because the windows were completely dark, and you could hear the wind pushing snow against the house. My parents were upstairs watching a movie. My brother, sister, and I were sitting on the floor near the train set, arguing about whose turn it was to control the tracks. The basement lights were on, but the corners of the room were still heavy with shadow. That's when I noticed something standing near the stairs. At first I thought it was just one of those shapes again. It stood at the far end of the basement, half in the light, half swallowed by darkness. Tall. Too tall. Its body looked wrong, too thin, with shoulders that sloped down at an unnatural angle. Its arms hung long and loose, almost reaching its knees. The skin, or whatever covered it, looked pale and stretched, like damp paper clinging to a frame. Its head tilted slightly to one side. We'd seen shapes before. But this one didn't disappear when we looked at it. It stayed there. My brother noticed it next. "Do you see that?" he whispered. My sister turned slowly. We all stared. The figure shifted. Just a little. Its joints moved stiffly, like they didn't bend the way joints should. Then it took a step forward. The movement was jerky, unbalanced. One shoulder lifted higher than the other, and its arms dragged slightly behind it like they were too heavy. We should have screamed. But we didn't. We'd seen weird things down there before. So at first we just watched. The figure stepped closer to the train set. The light from the lamp touched its face. And that's when I realized it didn't really have one. Its features were blurred somehow, like someone had tried to draw a human face but kept smearing it before it was finished. The eyes were sunken hollows, the nose barely a shape, and the mouth. The mouth looked stretched too wide, like it had been pulled sideways. Then it spoke. "Kids." The voice came out low and broken. Gravelly. Weak. It sounded like someone forcing words through a throat that didn't work properly. My sister's hand grabbed my arm. Because we all recognized the voice. Or at least what it was trying to be. "Come upstairs." It sounded like our mom. But wrong. The tone was off. The rhythm was slow and uneven, like the thing speaking didn't fully understand how human voices worked. The mouth stretched wider as it tried again. "Kids, it's time." Each word scraped out like it hurt. We could hear our mom upstairs laughing at the movie with our dad. The thing took another step toward us. Its arms twitched. "Come here." That's when my brother stood up quickly and said, Nope. Just like that. Not screaming. Not running. Just nope. We grabbed our stuff and walked calmly toward the stairs, trying not to look at it again. I felt its presence behind us the whole time. Heavy. Watching. None of us ran until we reached the top step. When we slammed the basement door shut, my sister locked it even though it didn't actually have a lock. We didn't tell our parents. I'm not sure why. But after that night, none of us wanted to spend much time in the basement anymore. The toys stayed down there. The train set stayed half-built. Sometimes I'd pass the door and swear I could hear faint sounds coming from below, plastic tracks clicking, little pieces shifting across the floor like someone was playing with them. But none of us went down to check. Because we all knew something. Whatever those shapes had been before. That night, one of them tried to learn how to talk to us. I was 8 years old the first time I saw her. I didn't tell anyone about it for years. Not because I thought they wouldn't believe me, though they probably wouldn't have, but because the memory always left me with this cold, sinking feeling that I couldn't explain. Even now, when I think about it, I can still feel the wind from that night. It was late, and my mom had stopped at a small convenience store on the corner of a quiet street. I remember the yellow glow from the store's sign reflecting off the wet pavement. She told me she'd only be a minute, which is something adults say when they really mean a few minutes. I didn't mind. I liked sitting in the car. But that night felt different. The wind was blowing so hard the entire car creaked and rocked slightly. It howled between the houses and pushed against the doors. I could feel the cold air slipping through the thin cracks around the windows and door seals, brushing faintly against my face. I remember hugging my arms around myself and watching the empty street. That's when I noticed the woman. She was standing across the road, on the sidewalk directly opposite the car. I hadn't seen her walk up. One moment the street was empty. The next, she was just there. She stood under a flickering streetlight, wearing a long dark coat that whipped slightly in the wind. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, shifting gently as the gusts passed. At first, I didn't think much of it. But then I realized she wasn't just standing there. She was staring at me. Not at the car. Not at the store. At me. Through the back window. Even from that distance I could feel it. Her head was tilted slightly forward, her eyes locked on mine. If it had been daytime, I might have thought she recognized me somehow, like a neighbor or a parent of someone from school. But at night, it didn't feel like recognition. It felt wrong. She didn't move. The wind blew around her coat, her hair, the streetlight above her flickered, but she remained completely still. I remember watching her for what felt like a very long time. Seconds. Maybe minutes. When you're a kid, silence can stretch forever. I blinked. When I opened my eyes again, she had moved. Just a little. Maybe a step forward. I frowned. I wasn't sure if she moved before I blinked or during it. The wind rocked the car again. I blinked. She was closer. Not much. But closer. A strange thought crept into my mind. Had she moved, or had she always been there? I blinked again. Closer. The distance between her and the car was shrinking, little by little. And the strangest part was that I never saw her actually move. Every time I opened my eyes after blinking, she was just nearer. Her face was still pointed straight toward me. Her expression never changed. Blink. Closer. Blink. Closer. It felt like time had broken somehow. Like the world was skipping forward in tiny pieces, and she was the only thing moving between them. My heart started beating faster. I tried not to blink. My eyes burned from holding them open, watering as the wind shook the car again. But eventually... Blink. She was halfway across the street now. My chest tightened. Blink. She was standing on the curb beside the car. I remember thinking something strange in that moment. Had I been blinking this whole time? Or had she always been moving like that? Then suddenly... Click. The sound made me jump. The car doors unlocked. My mom was back. I turned quickly toward the driver's side just as she opened the door and got in. "Sorry, honey," she said casually, brushing snow off her coat. The line was. I turned back toward the window. And screamed. The woman's face was pressed against the glass. Right against it. Her skin flattened slightly where it touched the window. Her eyes were wide and staring directly into mine. Her mouth was stretched open unnaturally wide, like she was screaming at the top of her lungs. But there was no sound. None at all. Just the wind outside. I scrambled across the back seat, slamming into the opposite door, crying and shaking. What? What's wrong? My mom shouted. By the time she turned around and looked out the window, the woman was gone. Completely gone. There was no one on the sidewalk. No one in the street. Nothing but the wind and the empty road. My mom checked outside the car, confused and a little annoyed, but there was nobody there. Eventually she convinced me it had been my imagination. A trick of the dark. A child's mind. I tried to believe that. But the memory never left me. For years I kept it to myself. It wasn't until I was an adult that I finally told my mom the story. We were sitting in her kitchen, drinking coffee. I laughed awkwardly when I finished, embarrassed at how ridiculous it sounded. She frowned the whole time. When I was done, she shook her head. I was inside for maybe 30 seconds, she said. You were alone in the car for barely a moment. I didn't argue. What was the point? But there was one part of the story I never told her. Something I only realized years later. Something that still makes my stomach drop whenever I pass a mirror. Because now that I'm older, I recognize the woman I saw that night. I see her almost every day. Same eyes. Same face. Same expression. The woman staring through that car window was me. When my son first told me about the thing in his room, I thought it was just another childhood fear. Kids imagine monsters. They hear the house creak at night, see shapes in the dark, and their minds fill in the rest. He was 6 at the time. Small. Quiet. The kind of kid who spent more time drawing than running around outside. So when he came to our bedroom one night, pale and shaking, I assumed it was just a nightmare. Mom, he said, clutching the doorway. There's someone in my room. I sat up in bed and rubbed my eyes. My husband groaned beside me. There's nobody in your room, I told him gently. You probably just saw a shadow. But he shook his head hard. No. He's there again. Again. That word stuck with me, but not enough to worry yet. I walked him back down the hall. His room looked exactly the way it always did, nightlight glowing softly, stuffed animals piled on the bed, the closet door cracked open. Empty. See? I said. Nothing here. He hesitated before climbing back into bed. Sometimes he stands in the corner, he whispered. I looked. Nothing. Sometimes he's in the closet. I opened it. Just clothes. Sometimes he's under the bed. I knelt down and lifted the bed skirt. Nothing there either. Eventually he went back to sleep. I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't. Over the next few weeks, he kept telling us the same story. The thing in his room. He always described it the same way. It looks like me, he said. Not like a monster. Not like a shadow creature. Just him. But wrong. He said the boy would stand in the corner of the room and watch him sleep. Sometimes it would hide in the closet. Sometimes under the bed. Once he said it was crouched beside his dresser, peeking around the side like it was trying not to be seen. Does he say anything? I asked him once. He shook his head. He just watches. My husband thought it was sleepwalking mixed with nightmares. I mostly agreed. But eventually we decided to prove it to him so he'd stop being scared. We installed a camera in his room. A small one on the shelf that could record the entire night. We also placed a tape recorder beside his bed. If there were sounds, whispers, footsteps, anything, we would hear them. The first night we recorded everything. Nothing unusual. No shadows. No figures. No strange noises. But when we watched the footage the next morning, we noticed something strange. At around 2:14 a.m., my son sat up in bed. His eyes were open, but they looked empty. He slowly climbed out of bed. Then he walked to the corner of the room and stood there, perfectly still, for nearly 5 minutes, just standing in the corner, facing the bed. Eventually he returned to bed and went back to sleep. The next morning, he told us what happened. "He was in the corner last night," he said quietly. I felt a small chill, but I tried to brush it off. "You were sleepwalking," I told him. But the next night we recorded again. And the same thing happened. Except this time he got out of bed and walked to the closet. He opened the door. Then he stood inside it, not moving, just staring out toward the bed. When he woke up that morning, he looked exhausted. "He was in the closet last night," he told us. My husband and I exchanged a look. Night after night we watched the footage. And night after night, it was the same. My son would get out of bed while still asleep. Sometimes he'd stand in the corner. Sometimes he'd crouch beside the dresser. Once we saw him crawl under his bed and stay there for nearly 10 minutes. Every single place he claimed to see the other boy was exactly where he went. Every movement he described, he was the one doing it. Eventually we sat him down. "You're sleepwalking," my husband explained gently. "You're seeing things in your dreams." My son listened quietly. But he didn't look convinced. "Then how do I see him?" he asked. "You're dreaming," I said. "You're seeing yourself in your dream." He shook his head slowly. "No." That was the first time he sounded truly scared. "I'm not dreaming." I tried to smile reassuringly. "Honey, the camera shows you leaving the bed." But he just stared at the floor. After a moment he said something that still keeps me awake at night. A small, confused whisper. "But I see him when I'm in the bed." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He looked up at me, eyes wide. "Every night I see him." He swallowed. "He's standing in the corner. In the closet. Under the bed. Just like he'd always said. But I'm in my bed watching him," he insisted. My husband started explaining sleepwalking again. But I wasn't listening anymore. Because something suddenly occurred to me. Something I hadn't thought about before. When we reviewed the footage, every time my son got out of bed, he walked to a corner, or a closet, or under the bed, and he stood there, watching the bed, the place where he had just been lying, watching it like someone was still there. And every single morning, my son told us the exact same thing, that he had seen himself lurking in the room, standing, watching him sleep. But there's something I never told my husband. Something I noticed the last time I reviewed the footage. On the recording from that night, the one where my son crawled under his bed. For a moment, the camera captured the mattress. The bed where he had just been sleeping. And for just a few seconds, before he climbed out, it looked like someone was still lying there.